Good morning and welcome to Landward, and as December arrives, so does the sunshine. Plus, of course, we're on that all too fast rundown into Christmas, but you won't find any turkeys on this programme. Here's what's coming up.
Ministers want to rationalise rural research, but does that mean more or less for those working the land?
And that will be following the judging of one of the food industry's most prestigious awards, the World Scotch Pie Championships. But first, access to our hills and wild areas will soon be a right entrenched in law. But for some landowners, the problem isn't access in a legal sense, it's access in a physical sense. And it's a problem that's landed some estates in trouble with local planning departments. Lindsay Cannon has been on the roads to nowhere.
How many people get worked up about hill tracks like this one? For some, they're scars on the scenery, and for others, they're simply essential access for today's working estates. A survey of 3,000 recreational hill users found that one of the greatest areas of concern was the visual impact of these tracks on the landscape. It's ironic, really, given that most folk heading for the hills, myself included, are more than happy to use these tracks for access. Many of the hill tracks on estates have been around for centuries and continue to be used by those managing the land today. But it's the maintenance of these old tracks, and in particular the creation of new ones, which is causing concern.
It's partly because they can have a very dramatic effect on the hill landscape, and they can be very visible from a long way off. They also have effects on habitats, particularly at high altitude where the rate of recovery is very slow. And they can also, if they're poorly designed, cause runoff of silt and sediment into watercourses, and that can be very important because they can affect the spawning grounds for salmon. And all of these impacts in turn are important for other activities which depend on wildlife and landscape, in particular tourism and outdoor recreation, which are major sources of income in the Cairngorms and elsewhere in the Scottish uplands.
Within the Cairngorms National Park, of the 4 local authorities, only Aberdeenshire has a planning policy on vehicle hill tracks, but the Park Authority has plans for one of its own.
There have been a few very isolated, regrettable examples in the past. So I think it's quite right to have a policy, but the policy in no sense says you will not build a hill track. What the policy says is, yes, of course we recognise that you need to build tracks at times, and make sure you build them in a sensitive and attractive way so that they fit with the landscape and don't damage the place.
Well, you can see here that we've got the old section of track and the new section of track there, and the reason we've repaired this section is because it was really boggy. Not only were state vehicles, Land Rovers and things getting stuck, but also from the walker's point of view it was a pretty miserable experience. You were going through the clarts.
On Invercald, they've been working with Upper Deeside Access Trust to improve a track used by the estate as well as walkers and cyclists. In this case, it's an example of cooperation and good practice, which allows the estate to get on with earning an income.
Grouse shooting, deer stalking, forestry, farming, all these sort of things. Good legitimate activities, economic activity area, and you do need a network of tracks.
How do you feel about planning control? Do you feel that these should be subject to planning control?
Well, at the moment, arguably we're not subject to planning control unless you're in a designated area, and I mean an SSSI. You can put up a new track for forestry or farming purposes without planning permission, but the track we're standing on at the moment, we did get planning permission simply because it is in a designated area. That hill feature is an SSSI, and as a result we got planning permission.
Are new hill tracks still going in the countryside?
10 years ago we hadn't thought about wind farms, we'd hardly thought about these phone masts, and those are hilltop features and they need tracks, and provided they're sensitively put in, then I see absolutely no reason why they shouldn't go ahead.
But landscape campaigners feel there's been nothing sensitive about work carried out by Invercall Estate in Glensluggan. They wouldn't allow us to film there, but Landward has been supplied with these images by the North East Mountain Trust. The estate has fallen foul of the hill track planning policy, with Aberdeenshire Council deciding that in this case major engineering work has been carried out which did require planning permission. The council says the estate has now submitted a retrospective application.
We had a lot of discussions with Aberdeenshire Council about the existence of this track, and after a lot of discussions we decided that probably the best thing to do would be to put in an application for the first section, which was a new bit, and we're now negotiating with them and we're discussing with them the details about, bringing it up to a standard slightly higher than it is at the moment. I agree that there is work that could be done and will be done to bring it up to a better standard than it is now.
Dr. Adam Watson has spent a lifetime monitoring the network of vehicle hill tracks in the Cairngorms, witnessing the destruction of over 60 miles of footpaths. He's adamant that the issue is not taken seriously, with many estates ignoring the need for permission in certain areas of the national park.
Part of the problem is that the planning authority, for example in Aberdeenshire, are far too easy-ozy. There's a case in Bankery a few years ago where a chap put a house up, it was too near another one, and the neighbour complained, and the planners took very quick action, enforcement, and the 3-storey building had to come down. Now, in the case of these hill tracks, years have gone by now, and they're still dithering.
The council had this response.
A breach of control by estates is treated in the same way as any other breach of planning control. In Aberdeenshire, the council will investigate, negotiate and, if necessary, will legislate.
Other estates within the Highland Council area aren't subject to any specific planning control with regard to hill tracks just yet, but will fall within the remit of any new planning policy within the national park.
Well, I think that's fine, providing there's a presumption in favour of allowing you to manage your land and continue making a living off your land. My concern is where they put in a designation and make a presumption against you being able to access your land or making a living from your land. And if you do that, you're just going to collapse all the rural industries. Not having a hill track is rather like owning a factory in an industrial estate and not having access onto the public highway.
The worry for countryside campaigners is that once you have a track like this and its maintenance pits dug into the hillside, you can't get rid of it. Well, it's not impossible. It can be done, but it does require a lot of money and effort. On Benaverd near Braemar, something unusual has happened. It's a case of now you see the vehicle track and now you don't. It's been restored to a footpath.
Well, where we're standing now, this used to be 6 or 7 metre width of bulldozed track, completely bare ground, nothing but bare ground, all the way back up onto the mountain of Benaverd behind us, 6.5 kilometres almost all the way to the top. So basically we've utilised every single piece of natural vegetation here. There's nothing been brought in, no seed, no fertiliser. Very simply we've lovingly lifted every piece of vegetation out of the ground off the spoil heaps from the side. We've used either by hand or machine to bring all the spoil back in and reprofile the ground.
You can see that here.
And
These
here it is.
clumps of vegetation.
Every sod has been put back into the ground and it's now beginning to take. Look,
It's doing quite well, isn't it?
Yep. And over the years, I mean, this is a long process. Well, the gaps will start to fill in between.
The results of the consultation process carried out by the Cairngorms National Park Authority into a planning policy for vehicle hill tracks will be published any day. But for some, the proposals just don't go far enough.
No, it's hopeless. It doesn't make any attempt to zone the area in terms of sensitivity and say that certain parts of the area shouldn't have any. It says that tracks would be allowed if they're necessary. Well, no estate's going to do it if they're not necessary. And it also spends a lot of words saying how you should do it. And that section is actually technically incompetent because some of the things that they are in there would actually cause more damage than is needed. I mean, I think it's a bit the blind leading the blind.
There is a certain kind of lobby that wants to pickle the place. This is in fact a man-made landscape. People have lived here for 3, 4, 5,000 years, and it will go on evolving. The important thing is that they're built well, they're built sensitively, they're built to last, and they're built so that there isn't erosion, damage and scarring.
The challenge facing Cairngorms National Park will be to keep the landscape campaigners happy with a strong policy on hill tracks while allowing the estates to go about their business.
When it comes to competition in the world of food, there can be few more prestigious awards than being crowned World Scotch Pie Champion.
I'm not so sure they're knee deep in grease and bad for you. Yes, there's a bit of quiche and grease in them. You need that as part of the flavour, because the type of meat that's used tends to be quite a fatty meat.
A good pie should have a good filling, nice flavour, spicy, nice crispy shell, and a bit of grease down your chin just to make sure it's a good Scottish pie.
Is that essential, is it?
Essential.
Good quality ingredients, some nice Scotch beef minced up, and you can't go wrong. Lovely pie.
There's nothing better to my mind than a pie straight from the oven, which is a privilege that unfortunately only the baker himself gets. Hopefully the juice dribbles slowly down your chin, neatly onto your tie, and that to me is a mark of a good pie.
And this year, judging takes place at Lauder College in Dunfermline, where 68 pie makers are delivering their entries. Now, 66 of them come from across Scotland, including one entry from Orkney for the first time. But 2 of them come from south of the border. But can the English really hope to take on the Scots at making Scotch pies?
The English pies will be as good as the judges decide they are. We're delighted that people from outside Scotland are coming up to Scotland and challenging us. It adds an extra layer to the competition. The championship evolved from the darker days of the late 90s when we had all the meat scares, and it was thought up as a way of restoring public confidence in products such as pies, bridies and sausage rolls, and also an opportunity to persuade pie makers to look at their product, reassure the public by making the pies better, making them look better, taste better, generally raise the image of the product.
Well, the pies have all been registered, so it's now up to these 4 judges. But what makes this lot think they're qualified to judge who makes the best Scotch pie in the world?
Bill Montgomery from Perth, Montgomery's Famous Pies.
Hello, I'm James Patrick Butchers of Camlin, and I've won many competitions in the past.
Jim Lamond from Lamond the Bakers, Kilmarnock, a practical baker with a lot of experience.
Zach Ballan's 4th generation of the pie shop in Kirkcaldy, established 1880.
Well, the pies have all been individually numbered, so there's no way this lot actually know where they came from. So let the judging commence.
It's extremely competitive, and as to significance, if I can give you an example of our very first world champion, John Davis, the butcher in Bowness. John was producing around about 400 pies a week in his butcher shop in Bowness. Having won the championship, for the next 5 or 6 months, his production went up to 4,000 pies a week. And for a long time he wouldn't speak to me because he was so tired. He was sick of the sight of making pies. But it had a huge effect on his business.
Well, that's it. The judges have made their decision. The points have been tallied, and with the chief scrutineer, Robert Ross. Robert, who has won? Who is the world Scotch pie champion?
I can't tell you that.
You can't tell us?
Nope, I can't tell you.
You can tell it. Trust me, I'm a journalist.
We have an awards ceremony on St Andrew's Day at Dunfermline Football Club, and the winner will be told then. See you at Dunfermline Football Club. Thank you.
Well, it's now 13 days since the judging, and I guess the original pies will be a little bit high by now. But inside the hospitality suite here at East End Park in Dunfermline are the bakers and the butchers who've created these pies, and they're sitting on tenterhooks waiting to discover who is world champion.
Nervous. No, I've eaten a pie, give you all the confidence in the world.
But it's not your pie, is it?
Oh, it's a lovely pie though.
Nervous, believe it or not. We won it 2 years ago, and we're hoping again.
We always hope we've got a chance. We've won it before, so we hope we can make it 3 out of 6. We've done 2 out of 5, so 3 out of 6 would be nice.
There you stand, brimming with pride. As a nation's favourite, you'll always reside. We'll all adore your classic lines, bursting with goodness, and dressed to the nines. The stuff in the middle, oh, it's spicy and broad. Is there only thing to beat that? No thing at all. Lads and lasses, I give you the pie.
Well, this is it. In just a few seconds' time, we'll know who is the Scotch pie making champion of the world. There's a lot at stake. What is it, Mince?
That leaves me with one certificate, and that certificate reads 2005 World Champion. It goes to Boghall Butchers and Paul Boyle.
Just feel over the moon, absolutely delighted. I never expected to get this far, but very delighted that this is only the second time we've been in the competition, and we've been making pies for 30 years, my father before me and myself, and just delighted to have been recognised for this.
BSE testing procedures are being checked after ministers finally agreed to lift Britain's over 30-month scheme, which banned older cattle from the food chain. With new BSE cases well below many EU countries, the Food Standards Agency advised government OTMS could go, providing the new testing regime was proved secure. Welcoming the move, beef industry leaders urged ministers to ensure that when OTMS ends, beef exports can also begin. It's hoped by late next year. American crayfish have been found in a tributary of the River Tweed. An eradication programme is planned as the alien species threatens habitats salmon and other native wildlife depend on. Scotland's first hostile crofting community buyout took a leap forward, with the majority of residents on the Park estate in Lewis voting in favour of the move. With plans to build a wind farm on the 25,000-acre estate, landlord Barry Lomas said he had no wish to sell. The community must now prepare their own detailed plans to submit to ministers, who have the final say. The total income from farming in Scotland dropped nearly 2.5% in real terms compared with last year. Early first estimates show low grain prices, rising energy costs and currency fluctuations all had an impact. Forecasts for next year are no better. The Access Forum for Loch Lomond and the Trossachs is seeking members. Scotland's Countryside Access Code will soon be published, and a body reflecting the interests of those using the national park would help advise managers on access issues. Tough new laws protecting Scotland's wildlife are now in force. The Environmental Conservation Act brings conservation law up to date, strengthening protection for sites of special scientific interest.
Hello. As we saw just before the news, Ewan seemed to be enjoying himself at the Scotch Pie Championship earlier this week. The coming week ahead, well, the weather will be quite changeable, but it's really quite mild for the time of the year, so I think there will be plenty of opportunities for further outdoor activities. And today is a case in point. High pressure right across Scotland. It's going to give some fine and settled weather, particularly towards the east of the Grampians. Some decent spells of sunshine here. And look at those temperatures, 9 or 10 degrees for Edinburgh and Aberdeen. Really very mild indeed. Not too bad out towards the west. You will notice the clouds slowly thickening up through the afternoon, but it should stay fine and dry. The wind's much lighter right the way across Scotland, particularly compared to yesterday. However, those winds will be picking up out towards the west through the second half of the afternoon and into the evening as a band of cloud and rain moves in from the Atlantic. And there's potentially some quite wet weather across western Scotland overnight tonight. But with the cloud and the wind, it's going to be a mild night. Temperatures shouldn't get any lower than 3 or 4 degrees, and maybe holding up as much as 7 degrees in Glasgow. So pretty mild night here, frost-free just about everywhere. And we should stay frost-free for the next few nights. Come the middle of the week, we might just see a slight frost returning, but I think that will be a short-lived event. So for Monday, we've got that weather front across the west of Scotland to begin with. So potentially quite wet weather, particularly over those hills and across the islands as well. Strong to gale force winds blowing here, and eventually that rain will cross its way towards eastern Scotland. So after a dry start in Aberdeen and Edinburgh, it will turn quite wet through the afternoon. But look at those temperatures, 11 or 12 degrees, really very mild indeed. Out towards the west, the rain clears away and it should brighten up, but there will be some blustery showers to follow. By Tuesday, things should have settled down. Another little ridge of high pressure builds across Scotland, so again it should be a dry, bright day with the best of sunshine towards the east of the Grampians, 8 to 9 degrees, so still not too bad temperature wise. A little bit more in the way of cloud out towards the west, and a little bit of a breeze blowing across the far north. That could blow just the odd shower in towards Shetland. Come Wednesday, it looks like a pretty grey, drizzly day. I think a little bit of early drizzle in the east, but that should clear away. Then it stays essentially dry, but rather grey. Not too bad temperature-wise, 7 to 9 degrees. Maybe as much as 10 degrees out towards the west. But here, we could well see some pretty wet weather, particularly across the islands, where again, the winds could be blowing as a gale. By Thursday, well, we've got this weak weather front. That's going to be introducing some wetter weather across the north and the west. Not too bad down towards the south and the east. And by Friday, this weather front crosses, and that'll bring some rain, followed by some blustery showers. That's it from me. Have a very good afternoon.
Whether it's gathering data on acid rain or forecasting how changes in management can alter landscape, research provides the knowledge and understanding needed to make a living in Scotland's countryside. It can be all about that eureka moment, but much more is about gathering data over years. Much of that work is carried out by the Scottish Agricultural College and the 5 specialist research institutes. Milk production and food at the Hannah in Ayr, animal health at the Morden in Edinburgh, plant breeding and genetics at SCRI Dundee. In Aberdeen, the Rowett studies nutrition and dietary health, while expertise at the Macaulay is all about habitats, landscape and the environment. But it all faces a radical shake-up. Ministers are about to launch a new strategy claimed to strengthen research into agriculture and the environment. But will it? And should those living and working in the countryside really care? The executive spends some £37 million a year on the Scottish Agricultural and Biological Research Institutes, or SABRIs. It's a substantial part of their income. But research costs are rising and priorities changing, so ministers have been looking again at getting the best value for taxpayers' money. Those involved understand why.
At the moment we have several fairly small organisations doing research, and in comparison to the big university sector, we are quite small. If we cannot reorganise ourselves on a more efficient basis, there's a danger that a number of the organisations may well be absorbed into that university structure, and I believe that would be the wrong outcome for the Scottish countryside. We would lose a particular focus of research on our rural sector.
This consultation document, sent out back in the summer, shows what ministers are thinking. It's believed the final strategy won't be very different. Lab work in the future will be driven more by government policy. Priorities are no longer production, but environment, welfare, health, nutrition and sustainability. Cash will go to each research project, not the building it's done in. And they're seeking ways to share administration costs. The body representing science in Scotland is generally supportive.
The challenges for the industry, the agricultural industry, are to operate within a system where they have to take much more notice of what the consumer requires, what the public actually expect in terms of the delivery of food from an environment which is not damaged. And in that context, this programme will if properly executed, deliver on that.
But others fear too much emphasis on short-term political priorities could mean the loss of invaluable experience and knowledge. Lovely, aren't they? They've been studying parasites like these at the Morden here in Edinburgh for over 80 years. It's work that helped to develop successful drugs to fight them. So, for decades, everyone thought they'd found the magic bullet, but they were wrong. The worms are becoming drug resistant, so the experts here are having to find new ways to control them. But what if the department had been closed down? Critics fear that would be more likely in future, driving away world-class scientists keen to build long-term careers.
The great strength of research council type research institutes, which the Sabris were until this strategy, is that you could have everything going on under one roof, right from fundamental science right through to the really, really relevant applied policy issues. But this concentrates it all on one end, managed not by the scientists themselves but by others within the civil service, and that's a highly unattractive proposition to the type of internationally renowned scientists you're trying to get into Scotland.
But those running the institutes believe they can cope with change and retain independence, that ministers recognise some research must be long-term and that programmes have already been shifted to meet today's needs.
The programmes are well identified: animal science, environmental science, crop science, and impacts on human health, and also some important areas involved in terms of interaction from our point of view, where animals interact with the environment and where animals interact with crop and plant science.
What about sharing administration though?
I think there could be many benefits to some shared administration at various different levels. I think we've got to be careful though that shared administration doesn't undermine the science excellence. That's what we're here to do within the institutes, to produce international quality research.
The future looks to be all about selection, choosing the right partners, making the right alliances. Some are already forging much closer links with nearby universities. It all seems very ivory tower, but the academics insist the debate is important.
It is a time of very significant change in the rural sector, and when there is change there's a need for research and there's a need for application of that research. So I believe everyone should be interested in this debate.
It's not just about what goes on in the countryside, it's about activity, profitability, even existence, right down the chains of all these activities like farming and food.
The EU is reviewing the future of rural research, while in the UK several other centres face the axe. We've been promised we'll hear soon what ministers plan for Scotland, but meanwhile the message for those earning a living in the countryside seems to be use it or lose it.
Now, last week we gave you the chance to spend a day in the company of the Worldwide Funds for Nature's top policeman, Phil Briggs of Strathclyde Police. And we asked you, how many species of crossbill are there in Scotland? Well, the answer is 2. And if you can see your name on the screen just now, then you're going to get close up and personal with Scotland's wildlife and with Phil in the coming months. Now, this week's competition prize is a little more basic: the Scotch pie. Now, we had great fun at the World Championships earlier on in the week. We want to give you the chance to try a whole selection of world-class pies. All you have to do is tell us how many times have the World Championships been held. Is it 5, 6 or 7? How many times have the championships been held? You can write to us at Landward, BBC Aberdeen, or email us at landwardbbc.co.uk.
On next week's programme, are the days numbered for Scotland's salmon netsmen?
I meet the Scottish artist who's found inspiration in the country's dung heaps. That's it for this week. Join us next Sunday if you can, BBC One Scotland, Sunday morning at 11:30. Until then, whether you decide to stay off the beaten track or remain firmly on it, enjoy your weekend in the Scottish countryside. Bye-bye.